Namaste everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. It's the Chess Puzzler for you. Today I am going to present a second chapter of Queen and Pawn endings as described by one and only Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan in his legendary book Winning Chess Endings. This chapter addresses two types of queen endings. One is the basic queen ending and the queen versus queen ending. We are going to learn the principles of both while keeping an eye out for specific patterns and tactics that will help you understand them. In a basic queen ending, the queen fights to prevent a lone pawn from promoting, and in a queen versus queen endings, it in which the superior side is trying to advance a pawn for the second queen, the strategy is far more complex. The key to both of these endings, as we shall learn, is the position of kings. As a chess player, most of us would have their favorite piece as a queen because it's quite powerful. It can go in a lot of directions where many pieces can't. However, as the game evolves, when the pieces become increasingly powerful and increasingly valuable because they begin to control even more squares. This is especially true of long-range bishops and rooks. As the board becomes less cluttered with pawns and pieces, the firepower of queen, however, radiates extremely. Let's dive into one of the examples that the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan has shared with us. In this one, he was quite delighted to have the white pieces. The black pieces are completely wiped out with a check. So white would play something like queen to e5. The king will go to d8. Queen takes on b8 with a check. King goes to e7. Queen comes back to e5 with a check. King d8. Queen takes on h8 with a check. King c7. Queen goes to h2 with a check once again. And as you can see, in terms of material, white has taken more than a queen's worth. A queen is like what, 9 points, but in this example, we saw that the queen has taken two knights and a rook, which is about 11 points. Such positions were extremely enchanting for the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan, and just like many of us, Queen was the apple of his eye. However, in his learning journey, when he would gloat over all the captures that his queen would make, he was particularly confounded when it was shown to him that the queen can be tripped up by just a single lowly pawn. And for that reason, we are going to start with our first topic in the queen versus pawn endings, which is about a queen that goes against a pawn which is on either B, D, D, let me just mark B, D, E, or G files. So the example that he has shared with us to illustrate this particular pattern is what we see on the screen right now. Imagine that a pawn race has resulted in white queening his pawn with a check. Right? It might just have happened right now that the pawn queened on d8 with a check. Black is desperate to promote his pawn. It's just one square away, but has to spend time to move his king out of check. How can white win the game? You should quickly recognize that white's only path to victory is to bring his king back to capture the e2 pawn. Well, there's no other way. And help deliver checkmate. Because the queen cannot win alone. Although queen is quite powerful, it can go in a lot of directions. A queen alone cannot deliver a checkmate, so it has to be with the help of the king. Now, black plays, say, king e3. Black threatens to queen his pawn. White must prevent this. He plans to harass the black king and force it to e1, which is the pawn's promoting square. What happens if the king is going to be an e1? It just means that the pawn cannot move there. This will be followed by queen h4 because now if the pawn pushes, the queen can simply take. King to d2, trying to protect the even square to allow promotion. But now queen goes to d4 for a check. King c2, queen e3. So queen can capture the pawn on e2 as well as on e1 once it promotes because nothing is guarding these squares. King comes to d1 to the pawn's rescue, and queen d3. If the king goes anywhere to Okay, so just two options right now. If the gift king goes to c1, then white can simply capture the pawn, and it's instant game over for black. So to delay that, king will go to e1. So this was the objective that we were trying to meet. Black makes this sad but unnecessary move as he has to protect the e pawn. Without the threat of promotion, white can use the tempo to bring back his king. This procedure is repeated throughout the ensuing play. Now, let's bring our king. King f2, queen d2. So now, of course, the pawn cannot move because there will be a check. So it's an illegal move. King goes to f1, queen f4 check, king g1, queen e3 check, king f1, queen f3 check, and king goes back to e1. So we did the same thing right now from the f file, what we had done from the d file earlier. We forced the king to go back to the e1 square. And now once again, white gains time to bring his king closer. And that's what white is going to do. King to d5. Right? And this will force king to make the move king d2, queen f2. We are going to repeat all the moves all over again now from the d file. King d1 and queen d4, king c2, queen e3, and king d1, queen d3, king e1, and king e4. The king started from b7, but now it is on e4. You can see how closer it has already come. Now, black will go to f2, queen f3, and king e1. Because if the black king goes to g1, then white will simply capture. And we have king d3. White captures the pawn and checkmates on the following move. This was an example when the opponent pawn was on the e file. You can position the pawn on either b, d, or g files and try to win the match. The superior side will always be able to win with a tempo to bring his king closer and to pick off the passer pawn. Let us move to another set of example where a queen is fighting against a pawn or an h pawn. And that's what you see on the diagram right now. We have an opponent pawn which is on the a file, which is only one square away from promotion. Uh, H files and A files are usually quite tricky in a lot of different scenarios, which includes the one that we see on the screen right now. The reason for Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan's disdain for H and A pawns is that they were limited and could capture in only one direction. You can see it can capture just on one square, right? It cannot go on to different squares. In general, H and A pawns do have less value than the other pawns. They redeem themselves in basic queen endings, and that's why when you have a pawn, when you are defending a position, and if you have a pawn on A or H file, it's slightly easier for your side because the aggressors, will not be able to very easily capture it, especially when it's a queen ending like the one we see. Now let's see why this position, despite being queen up, is actually a draw, and why did that shock the Grandmaster Yasser. Queen starts with a basic move. It's going to be a check. It's going to force the king onto the promoting square and then try to push forward the king so that we can take the passer. It's the same principle that we did in the last theme as well. King will go to b1, queen b4, king c2, queen a3, king b1, queen b3, and king is forced on a1. But what do you see is the difference in this case? Can we move the king closer to the pawn, to the black pawn? No, we can't because Black King has nowhere to go right now. So in the next move, it's going to be stalemate. So the only thing that we can do right now is, I don't know, move the queen somewhere and keep playing this dance, not allow black to promote, and at the same time not being able to push your white king forward to deliver a checkmate. Eventually, it's a draw. So this made Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan realize that there must be some zone of squares where the white king should be present so as to force a win on the opponent side, even if the pawn, especially when the pawn is on either A or H files. So to further explain that, he repositioned the white king, just for the sake of this example, he repositioned this white king somewhere closer to the black king. The idea is for the white king to be close enough to this pawn and also bring the queen close enough to this pawn to eventually capture it and then deliver a checkmate to the black king. So here begins the dance. Queen b6, king goes to a3, queen a5, and after king b3, queen b5, king goes back to a3, and now we are going to restrict the movements possible for the black king by king c2. After which, as you can see, all of these squares are not available for the black king, which means the only move possible for black is to move its pawn. It can either queen itself. If it queens itself, then it's queen b3 checkmate. And if it promotes to something lesser, like a knight with a check, then king moves to c3, knight c2, and queen b3 checkmate. So what Yasser Seirawan discovered was by this particular example, he discovered that area of squares that start and end like this. So all the squares, including the ones on the edge, all the squares inside of this area, if we have the white king in somewhere in this area, then white can enforce a win on black despite having a pawn which is just one square away from promotion on A file or the H file. Let's take another example to convince ourselves that we are in the right zone for checkmating the opponent king. As we can recall that this was the area on or within which the white king should be so as to deliver a checkmate to the black king. Now in this case, white will start with queen f6, king goes to b1, queen f1, king b2, queen e2, king b1, and now king c4. We allowed the promotion to the queen. This will be followed by king b3. Now we remember that the white king was inside the zone, which means a checkmate should be possible. And now as you can see, all of these squares, sorry, all of these squares are unavailable for the black king to go to, which means, and if, for example, if the black king just moves to the only possible square, which is c1, then queen c2, checkmate. So black will move its queen somewhere out, and it's going to be checkmate anyway. So the exercise for you right now, the challenge for you right now is going to be for you to place this white king anywhere inside this particular region and try to deliver a checkmate to black. With that, we are going to hop to the next topic, and we are going to cover a situation where a queen is battling a c or an f pawn, as we can see in this particular case. This is quite confusing because the c and f pawns could also withstand the power of a queen, a typical situation that we see on the screen. In this position, white's king is even closer than before. Despite this added advantage, the position is actually just drawn. And why is that? We start with something like queen b6, king goes to a1. Black avoids stepping onto c1, the promotion square, which would allow white time to draw his king closer to c pawn. Another bad move would be something like king c3, which can be followed by queen d4, king b3, and queen a1, which successfully neutralizes the black's pawn. So basically, the king cannot move closer to the pawn to guard it on c2 or c1, which is why king will have to go somewhere farther away from the pawn. And in the next step, the queen will have the pawn. To avoid that, black plays king a1, followed by queen d4 nonetheless, king b1, queen b4, king a1, queen c3 check, king b1, and queen b3 check. White has managed to maximize the potential of his queen. Unfortunately, the queen is too strong for its own good. It's the same situation that we had seen in the last scenario when the pawn was on the a file. King just goes to a1. Now you'll see all of these squares are not available for the black king. So if we try to bring our king closer to the pawn, then it's stalemate. Then in that case, black will simply promote, and it's going to be a draw. But white does not want that. Also is the case of a stalemate if black simply captures. Because if queen captures, then once again all these squares are going to be unavailable for the black king to go to, and therefore it's going to be stalemate. So if you are thinking that there must be a winning zone in which if the white king is already present, then white should be able to enforce a checkmate to black king, then yes, you thought that right. In this situation, as you can see right now, the pawn is on the c file. The box that we see that starts from a5 to d5 and from d4 to g4 to g1. If the white king is present on or within this particular area on the chessboard, then white is in good position to force a checkmate on the black king. So a challenge for you is to keep the king where it is right now on d5 or anywhere in this entire area that we see on the chessboard and try to force a checkmate on black.
With that, we bring the first installment of Queen versus Pawn endings to a close. There's a lot more to come in this chapter, so please stay tuned. And once again, all the credit goes to the great Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan and his book Winning Chess Endings.
Namaste everyone, it's the Chess Puzzler. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel today. We are going to cover the second installment of the chapter number 2 from Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan's amazing book on chess endgames. It's called Winning Chess Endings. In the first installment, video 2.1, Queen versus Pawn Endgames Part 1, we saw how we have to play to win when we have a queen while the opponent has a pawn by preventing its promotion or making its promotion completely useless. And now we are going to see how do we have to play when we have a queen and a pawn while the opponent has a queen as well. Grandmaster Yasser describes that queen and pawn versus queen endings are notoriously difficult because the defending side is often able to give a whole series of checks driving the king around the empty board. While the superior side is trying to promote its passer, the twin tasks of escaping from a perpetual check and promoting the pawn are immensely difficult. And because of that difficulty, Grandmaster Yasser has limited the discussion to those positions where passed pawns are just one square away from queening, as we see in this case as well. Of course, it might be extremely difficult to cover each and every scenario where we have these pieces on the board, but we are going to go through some common examples and recurring themes that we have seen for the defender as well as the attacker, and and encourage you to explore the other possibilities based on the concepts that we learned today. The pattern that we see on the screen right now is a study by composers and endgame pioneers Joseph Kling and Bernhard Horowitz, and it was published in 1851. In this pattern, in this placement, we see that Black's king is misplaced. The best square for the defending king is directly in front of the passer, which is going to be this square, where he can hope to win the pawn. In a case like this, in which the king is blockading, the defender usually has no problem drawing the position. And this brings up our first principle in these endings. And the principle goes something like this. If the defending king is unable to stabilize itself in front of the passer, the best solution is to get the defending king as far away from the passer as possible. So we're talking about something like this. Without further ado, let's see how white can win this game in the best possible way. We'll start with something like queen b4. Now, one of the paradoxes of queen endings that Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan explains is that the superior side is often better off making a quiet queen move than trying a forceful series of checks. After queen b4, black's king is frozen in place. You see, the black king cannot go anywhere at all. All of these moves will be illegal moves. Therefore, black's queen must maintain the pin against the b7 pawn, or the under promotion b8 converting to a knight will be b8 converting to knight will fork the queen and the king, and white will easily win. So to maintain this pin, black moves to queen h1 as far away as possible. Black takes the best defense to avoid a number of other attractive losses. It's a funny way how Yasuo Saravan puts this. Retreating the queen along this diagonal is not that easy. Let's see why Yasuo Saravan feels so. Had queen played something like queen d5, queen a4 check, king b6, followed by queen b3 check, queen takes on b3, and this wins because it's a check, and the moment the king moves, the black queen is ours. So it seems for a move that this was a queen b3 was a stupid move, sacrificing the queen while having a winning position. But the idea behind that was promotion and then taking the queen back on b3. Now instead of queen d5, had black played something like queen f3, for example, then once again queen a4, king b6, and queen b3 wins once again. If black moves somewhere to safety, then white takes the black's queen. So black is actually forced to take the queen, which will be followed by a promotion. Black moves, and black surely wins. We'll see one more possibility, one more variation in this case. If the black queen moves to, say, g2, in this case, we have queen a3, king b6, and queen b2. So the idea is the same. The black queen will have to take, followed by a skewer, winning the black queen back while being one entire queen up. So to avoid all of this, after queen b4, a quiet waiting move, queen goes to h1, followed by queen a3, king b6, king b2, king c7, and queen h2. Once again, the idea is the same. If you already saw that this is what white is trying, then just pat yourself on the back. It was an amazing move. Queen is forced to take because if black doesn't take, then the white will take the queen and get one more queen in the next move. And we get a queen nevertheless. And voila, it's going to be a skewer all over again. One of the things that we learn from this position is that white is able to queen only because of the black king. It is completely misplaced, and like we said, if the black king cannot be somewhere in front of the passer, black king has to be somewhere far away so that black queen can handle the business right here. Let's continue and look at another example. With the king out of the way, as we can see, the black king is far away from the action going around over here. The defender can exploit this position to his advantage. This position in the screen that we see right now was published in 1763, which was like 13 years before the United States of America even came into independence. And more than 200 years later, this analysis is still correct. Black draws by forcing white to queen his pawn. Confused? You'll not be anymore after you see the series of moves that black plays. Queen goes to h4, queen h7, and now queen plays queen d8, g8. We get a queen. White achieves his aim of promoting his pawn to a queen, but it's not enough because black is able to establish a perpetual check. Do you see it? It's queen f6, queen at g7, queen h4, and you can see this is definitely going to be a draw. No matter which queen moves in, if it's this one, then queen goes back to d8 and it's check. It's f6. This will keep on going until there's a check. So despite having two queens, white just cannot win this game. And the only reason this is possible is because at the starting of this position, black king was far away from the queening pawn that white has. Let's look at one more example of queen and pawn versus queen endings. Here, the white passer, the d pawn, is one of the best that he could have. Like other central pawns, it offers white's king good shielding opportunities. Black, for his part, is happy with the placement of his king because once again, black king is far away from the promoting pawn, so that's a good place for the pawn king to be completely out of the way. This placement, however, is not a salient feature of the position. The key factor is the poor position of black's queen. It's at d8, and ideally the black king should have been there in front of the passer, but it's the black queen limiting her power, limiting her powers considerably. In general, the queen makes a very poor blockade. Well, because when the queen has the potential of moving in so many different directions, if you install a queen right in front of the passer, you are seriously limiting the powers that she has. So the principle to keep in mind over here is whenever the defender's queen is forced to blockade a passer on the promoting square, the game is lost. Now let's see how white goes up to win this game. Black is going to be unable to create any perpetual check opportunities because his blockading queen is limited in its movements. As the defender in such endings, you have to fight to keep your queen as active as possible. Resist using your queen as a blockader. We'll start with something like queen d6. That's a check. King goes to a2. That's going to be followed by queen f7. White king moves in such a way as to prevent black's queen from giving a single check. Now the black queen cannot go to f6, cannot go to f8, cannot go to e8, cannot go to g8, and cannot go to e7. All of these squares are protected by the white pieces. Therefore, white is not going to get any check at all. So the black moves its king to b3. Queen goes to e6. That's a check. King c2 and queen e7. The blockading queen is forced to move, and with that, the promoting pawn wins the game. If the black takes, for example, then we take back, and the black king will not be able to reach this pawn in time before it promotes itself to a queen. Having learned about the topics 1, 2, 3, and 4, do you feel ready to learn how to deal with the most difficult queen endings where there are multiple pawns? That's exactly what we are going to do right now. And thanks to the brilliant explanation given by the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan, we are going to find this concept much easier once you learn what it's all about. In such endings, the positions are so complex that you will have to calculate each position for its unique characteristics. Still, you can help your play by utilizing a few principles. Principle number one: queens are at their most powerful when centralized. Principle number two: the safety of the king is paramount. Principle number three: The most important pawn is a passer that is well advanced. And the final principle number four, it is important to be able to recognize perpetual check patterns. Before we tackle the difficult subject of queen endings with a number of pawns, you should familiarize yourself with two very common perpetual check patterns, the one that we see on the screen right now and the one that I'm going to show you next. In these patterns, White's threat of promoting his passed pawn is unstoppable. The Black's only saving grace is a perpetual check. As we can see, Black's pawn is far away, and if Black Queen goes all the way on this side of the board to protect the passer, then Black is just going to lose the queen and the game. So the only way how Black can render this promotion useless is by setting up a perpetual check machine. So the standard queen e1, king h2, queen h4, king g1, and queen e1. This perpetual check perpetual check mechanism is going to be the game saver for Black, as Black cannot expect anything better than that. And in this particular pattern, we'll see that queen d1, king g2, queen f3, king g1, queen d1. This repetition of moves is going to be the saving grace for Black. If you for a second just removed these pawns, both the g pawns that we have, then in that case, queen d1, king g2, queen g4, this is going to be a very common theme for a perpetual check for Black. So although White's pawn is just one step away from promotion and actually checkmating the Black king, this perpetual check system is going to bring Black out from the lion's den. All the positions now, starting with this one, we are going to have to answer a series of questions before making a move. As you can see, in this case, we are 2 pawns down as White. And although this particular position is about 110 years old, it's still relevant as far as queen versus queen and pawn endings are concerned. What do you play as White in order to move? Remember, the black pawns are moving in this direction. Yeah. So we have to try to find a move that helps White salvage the situation. We start with something like Queen e5. That will be followed by Queen g5, because if Black played something like pawn push to g5, can you see a checkmate in two? Queen e1, and the only legal move is Queen g3, followed by Queen takes on g3. That's checkmate. So to avoid that, after Queen e7, Queen g5, and this will be followed by Queen e4 check. Then we have Queen g4, and I'm sure you realize where this is going. It's a threefold repetition that is going to lead to a draw. So despite being 2 pawns down, White has the fantastic visualization power of knowing how to deliver a perpetual check, allowing no room for Black to move its pawns and therefore draw the game. Let's take another example, which was published by a Russian grandmaster in 1962. White has one passed pawn and is also one pawn up. It clearly seems to be in a winning position, but how do you proceed in order to make sure that all the moves are the best ones, which will not allow a single opportunity for Black to come up in this game? You start with pushing the passed pawn. If the queen takes, then queen takes back, and White definitely is in a better place. So one thing that you keep in mind in such positions is that in queen endings, one of the things that is of crucial importance is to try to weaken the pawns around the king. How do we do that? We have to try to make certain moves, maybe check moves or maybe forcing moves or the only legal possible moves, in order to force the opponent to move the pawns away from the king. Let's see how we can do that. After c7, queen will try to cover the c8 square so that when white promotes, the queen can take back. Instead of defending that pawn from c5, white tries to force black to move its pawn. And it does that by playing queen to e4 check. Okay. Uh, let's see what would happen if you played queen c5. Then queen will simply go to c8. We learned earlier that yes, blockading a pawn is not the best idea. But in this case, it works because white is also stuck with this pawn. White queen cannot do much while not being very close to this pawn. So both the queens are stuck, and now it's going to be a battle of king and two pawns versus king and two pawns, which might not be as decisive as it should be. Then this will be followed by queen d6, staying very close to the c7 pawn. Queen goes to f5, once again making sure that the square on c8 is covered. And this is eventually going to be very easy for black to deliver a perpetual check somewhere or the other. So this is not going to turn out very well for white, which is why, to avoid all of this complication, white plays queen e4 check, which is going to be followed by g6. So we did force black to move its pawn. Queen c2. Now what are we doing here? The powerful dual purpose move. White is prepared to answer queen d6 with g3, which queen d6 and g3. So we are ready for that. And at the same time, we still have the threat of promoting the pawn. So the queen will have to go back to this point and lose tempi. So therefore, white plays queen c2, followed by queen c8 and queen c5. Why are we playing this move? We are playing this move to take advantage of the broken pawn shield. So the idea is for the queen to jump to e7 and deliver a check. So white plays h5. Queen goes to e7 as we thought, king h6. And now is a key moment. What would you play? Would you play g3? Would you play g4? Would you play h4? Would you move the king somewhere? Sorry, queen somewhere? The best move over here is h4. If you wanted to play something like queen d8, if you thought that black would simply take and we would promote on d8, then it's fair. But what if black played queen to f5? There are there is no way we can actually answer to this set, because if you think that you do something like pawn promotes and queen e5 check, then you see where this is going, right? The pawn moves here, and it's going to be a continuous perpetual check given by black. So despite having two queens, white is going to be completely helpless because black will deliver a draw. Therefore, pawn promotion or going to queen to d8 and expecting black to trade is not the right move. The right move over here is pawn goes on h4. This choice confines the black king and gives white king a bit more breathing room, because now white has some squares to go to, while black king is completely devastated. It really cannot go anywhere at all. All the three squares are protected by white pieces. This can be followed by something like queen h8. Now, being on the blockading square, as we learned earlier, limits the black's options. The active try is something like queen a6, queen f8 check. The king has only one place to go, that's h7, and then we promote. And it's going to be too easy for white to move, or white to win. To prevent all that, after h4, black plays queen h8. Now queen goes to e3, Black is going to be chased back to a more vulnerable square, which is king h7. And now queen e6. The idea is for white to promote while protecting that square. So black will lose its queen and white will retain a queen. This can be followed by queen d4. You can notice that the white is making it very difficult for black to deliver a perpetual check. So what will black do now? It's going to be queen e7 check, and white is basically taking advantage of the move king h7 to reposition his queen. King goes to h6, queen g5, queen h7, and now we have a queen. We have basically forced black to move its king and queen in such a way that white ends up with two queens, while black has no way to deliver a perpetual check, let alone a single check. And now we are going to continue to the last topic of the queen and pawn endings that is most awaited for this particular video, and it's a game between Bulgarian Grandmaster Veselin Topalov versus the world's highest rated player at that time, who was Grandmaster Garry Kasparov. This was the game was played in round seven of the famous Linares tournament, which is held annually in Spain. And this tournament markets itself as the Wimbledon of chess because year after year it features a round robin of world's highest rated players. This game was played in 1999 and it teaches us a lot about the queen and pawn endings. And I hope you are extremely excited for it as I was when I read this particular game. The position that we see on the screen right now was reached after Black's 43rd move. White, who is an exchange down, meaning a rook for a bishop or a rook for a knight, has erected a near fortress-like position, having closed all the files to keep Black's rooks at bay. As you can see, White's pawns are superiorly placed right now, and also the bishop, which is completely protected. It does not allow any entry to Black. And don't forget, Black is Garry Kasparov himself. So it's going to be super exciting to find out how Black just cuts through all of these defenses and breaks down all the walls of this mighty fortress and win the game. Looking closely at this position, we can say that White's rook is also frozen. Right? If White captures, then Black gets the open file, and it's going to be much easier for Black to deliver checks and break the fortress right away. White's king must remain near the center to prevent Black's king from encroaching. Right? If it wanders too far to the queen side, then Black will trade rooks on the g5 square, and the newly minted passer, either the h5 pawn or the f5 pawn, would scurry to promotion. So the idea is that the white king has to be somewhere here, so the black does not enter this area and provide support to the black pawns until the promotion square. The situation obliges white's bishop to move. Yep. So if you cannot move the rook, if you cannot move the pawns, if you cannot move the king, then the only possible piece that you have to compulsorily move is going to be the white bishop. A peculiar series of circumstances that allows black's king to scoot around the board at will. So in this case, however, white starts with c3. It figures that it still has one another move that it can make right now. That is going to be followed by king c6. Unable to make progress in the center, black takes another approach to penetrate the white's fortress. Just wait and watch. It's going to be so exciting. I'm thrilled like a small child right now. I'll show you how this game develops. This is going to be followed by king f3, king b5, bishop to c5, king a4, bishop to d4, rook to d7, king e3, king b3, and king e2. The game has moved to this particular position after 49 moves. Black has achieved his maximum and now needs a breakthrough. Black has repositioned its pieces. If you remember, the black's king was on the d5 square. It has moved all the way over here to b3. It is already in the white's territory, but how is that going to help black? Black plays, Black plays rook takes on g5. Why? Because black wants to break open the position, break down the walls of this fortress that Topalov has created, so that Kasparov can make an entry with its rook and also take down all these pawns while helping the black pawns to promote. This is going to be followed by f takes on g5, rook takes on g4. Oh yes, black sacrifices a rook for a bishop. So this is what it's called as an exchange down. This is going to be followed by c takes on d4. Obviously, you need the rook back, and now c3. Suddenly, black has a passed pawn, and this is going to be followed by g6, c2, g7, and we have a queen. But Topalov has a queen too. This game has now transformed into our topical queen ending, as we can see on the screen. There are two queens on the board, and there are several pawns on both the sides of the board. It's time to take stock. How did Gary Kasparov approach this ending? First and foremost, he counted the material and realized he was a pawn down. Not good at all. However, he made a few other evaluations because, come on, it's Gary Kasparov. Black's extremely active king is the key. Right? White's king is super passive, but Black's king is quite active because it's very close to the opponent pawns. It's very close to the queen, and it can easily travel to the center of the board without white being an interference. It can create checkmating threats by combining the threat of capturing white pawns with the idea of working with the queen. The next trump is the passer. Which side has one? Can you guess? You don't have to guess. Can you see on the board and find out which side has a passer? Of all the pawns in the board, black's f5 pawn is the most dangerous passer. White has one too, but it's not going to be quite helpful because black pawn can just take back. But black's f5 pawn, that's going to be detrimental to white's position. Therefore, despite being a pawn down, black has two key trumps, the better king and the f5 passer. This is going to be followed by queen to c4 check. And once again, it's a dual purpose move. Kasparov defends the e6 pawn while playing to capture with check the white's pawns. White will be forced to go to e3 and will play king c3. Black renews the threat to the d4 pawn, forcing white's queen to take a decisive posture, and therefore white plays queen d8, followed by queen d3, king f4, and king d2. This was a key move. White had hoped to escape with his king via the g5 square, not only to avoid queen checks, but also to munch the h5 pawn, and so gain his own passer. There's one little question for you over here. Why do you think did not grab the d4 pawn? That's right here. This would have been a check and also would have forced white to trade the queens. If you can find the answer to that question, then please mention those in the comments. Now this is going to be followed by king f3, queen d1. This fine move repositions the queen. Black wants to push his f-pawn up the board to make a new queen while creating checkmating threats. At the moment, white's king is blockading and has to be pushed aside. And that's what white does. White king moves to e3. White obviously could not step forward with his king by playing something like king f4, because then we have queen g4 with the check, king e3, and then f4. So this is exactly what black is trying to do. And if Topalov allows Kasparov to make such a move, then the game is going to be over much, much, much sooner. Because once again, come on, it's Topalov, right? And this will be followed by king f2, queen g3, king f1, queen, sorry, it's going to be queen d3 check, king g1, queen e3 check, king f1, and f3. This is going to be a completely winning game because no matter what white plays, black has a threat of queen e2 and then queen g2 checkmate. So to avoid all of this, after king, so to avoid all of this, king moves to e3, which is going to be followed by queen g1, king goes to e2, queen g2, and king e3. This play has brought us to this position after move 61, where Garry Kasparov delivers a telling blow, and that's f4 check. Topalov resigns as soon as he sees this lovely finale. He is forced to play king takes on f4, and that's going to be followed by king d3 with a deadly threat of queen g4 checkmate. Right. So if say black or if white plays something like queen g5, then we have queen f2, which once again is a checkmate. Did you see this coming? I had not, I'll be honest with you. So this game fragment contains an important lesson. When a king is able to make it behind the enemy lines, quite often the enemy pawns act as a pawn shield. If you were to replay this fragment and extract a few pawns from the board, the d4 and the b4 pawns, for example, then black's king would have been much more vulnerable to checks. But luckily, well, Garry Kasparov made use of enemy pawns, not just his own pawns, and that's why he is Garry Kasparov. Of all the endings, I have found that queen endings are the most difficult and complex. I encourage you to practice this ending, but I suggest that you do so in the context of a whole game. Merely playing queen ending positions will not give you an appreciation for the challenging and beautiful nature of this particular ending. And with that, we come to a close on the queen and pawn endings chapter. This is going to be followed by a really, really long chapter on rook endings, on which I'm going to start creating videos very soon and post it for your benefit. If you are learning from my videos, if you think that my content is rich enough for you to improve your chess, then I request you to please like this video, share as much as possible, share it with all your friends, colleagues, and family who are interested in improving their chess. And I promise to keep doing better with every single content that I create for you. And finally, do not forget to subscribe on my channel. It's a humble request. It helps me, it motivates me, it inspires me to create more content for you. And well, I'll see you next time. It's the Chess Puzzler signing out.